Hey, what's good, everybody? We are here today for the most recent statistics and what's going on in South Surrey and White Rock. And this is going to be very, very fascinating because we're seeing some movement and some changes right now that we haven't seen in quite some time. So I'm really excited to show and share this episode with you and give you a little bit of an idea of what's happening as of April 2026. So let's jump right into it. Number one, we got to remind ourselves what we're actually talking about. And what we're talking about here is what's called the benchmark price from something called the home price index. This tracks a typical home over time. It's not a real house, but what's considered a benchmark property with consistent features. So it's not a real home. It's kind of like a pretend home, but I want you to think of it almost like inflation. Is the inflation going up or down for a particular type and style of home in a particular neighborhood? Now, let's remind ourselves, or actually not remind, let's look. You haven't seen this before, but this is the most recent news released by the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board. And there's a couple things that I wanted to bring to your attention on here. What it says is we have seen early signs of stabilization with benchmark prices edging up month over month for the first time in 11 months. It goes on to say that there was a 20% increase from the month of February in terms of actual sales, still a 3% decrease from the same month last year, but and 42% below the 10-year average, but a big, big increase over the month that was the month prior. Overall inventory levels remain elevated in the Fraser Valley with just over 9,200 active listings, up 10% from February and 50% above the 10-year average. So we still got lots of listings. We're still well below the 10-year average, but a big, big jump month over month. And I think you're going to see that reflected in some of these numbers. So this, just as a reminder, the red line here represents kind of all the properties thrown in a blender in the Greater Vancouver board, which is really Whistler down to Vancouver, Richmond, Maple Ridge, Tri-Cities, all those sorts of areas. And the blue line is really what's happening with prices in the Fraser Valley board. So you got North Delta basically all the way out to Abbotsford. Now let's get into some of the specifics here for what's really going on. And condominiums. Now, you can see over the last 2 months, condominiums have increased in activity. As the red line that you're seeing on there represents what is considered a balanced market condition. And you can see that it was teetering down as low as about 10%, meaning about 1 out of 10 condominiums that were coming to the market were actually transacting. And that is slowly been improving, where it's just shy of about 15% right now. And that's normally where we would consider that a balanced market condition. There's no real advantage to a buyer or a seller. And of course, right now, there's an advantage to the buyer as the market conditions, there's lots of inventory out there. They got lots to choose from, that sort of thing. Now, fascinating enough is we actually saw a price jump in condominiums for the first time in almost a year, which is pretty remarkable. And I mean, condominiums, I mean, all properties have had a fairly rough go, as you can imagine. But look at this, you guys, an 11,500 jump in the benchmark price in condominiums month over month. Now, they're still down quite a bit year over year, but that is no number to shake a stick at. Now, again, it's for a benchmark. This isn't a real condominium necessarily. But again, for the first time in a long time, prices actually jumped up. Now, I find that this home price index and the numbers that it tracks in terms of prices, I actually find this typically trails what's actually happening in the market by a couple months. And you can see this big spike that happened just before the end of the year. That, may prove to be true, that maybe that's part of that spike that we're actually seeing. But nonetheless, the benchmark prices are telling us that we're up about 11,500 month over month. Now, based on the conditions, based on everything, we still have a market condition for condominiums in the neighborhood where there is an advantage for buyers. So surely the activity has improved, and we know that the spring market is definitely here. It's certainly getting busier out there. I'm hearing that anecdotally as well, is experiencing that with my own clients. Rates, anybody waiting for rates to change? We've talked a lot about this in previous versions of these videos. I wouldn't be holding my breath for rates to change. But sellers still need to be ultra competitive when they're pricing their condominiums, because there still is a lot of choice, although it's getting a little tighter for the sellers out there, or for the buyers rather. You still need to be competitive because 1 month does not make a trend, so to speak. So we'll have to keep an eye on that, and a great reason to subscribe to this channel so you know what's going on month over month and you can follow those trends. Now let's talk a little bit about townhomes in the area, and you can see that these have entered a balanced market territory. Now this is good news for anybody that owns a townhome in in the neighborhood. In fact, the last 2 months in a row, we've seen the benchmark prices of townhomes increase, which is something we haven't seen for a long, long time. So month over month, townhomes are up about $5,100 in the neighborhood, and year over year, they're down just about 80,000. But for the first time in a very, very long time, I'm actually going to suggest that there is an advantage for sellers in this market right now for townhomes. Now, there is something called micro areas or niche areas. So, as an example, Crescent Beach versus Grandview, both can be doing different things. This is painting everything with, one brush stroke sort of thing and throwing it all into the mix. But generally speaking, in South Surrey and White Rock, things have improved for townhome buyers over the last 2 months. Again, first time we've seen prices increase not only once, but twice month over month. Uh, I've always kind of suggested this is the missing middle. This is going to be the type of property that continues to be popular and in demand, regardless of what the market's doing, because there's lots of young millennial families that are having kids, have kids, and they need to get out of those 1 and 2 bedroom condos and get some more space and be kind of ingrained in the neighborhood and whatnot. So this is going to be the market to continue to watch because those buyers are craving space and amenities, as I suggested. Detached homes. Now, detached homes have been in a nasty place for a long time, and you can see it's been up and down and up and down, and they're still below a 10% sales to active ratio, meaning 1 out of 10 properties coming to the market are transacting, and that is going to continue to have downward pressure on the prices, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. So, month over month, prices are down about $4,300 in the detached category, and year over year, they're down $174,000. Terrible, right? So, clearly, this is a market that is largely in advantage of the buyers. There's tons and tons and tons of inventory out there. So go shoot your shot, put your offer out there. If you are a home seller, you really have to take a look at what's going on with the market. And although we've seen some improvements month over month in terms of removing or more buyers participating in the market, you're still in that 1 out of 10 category, which is quite a ways from being in even a balanced market condition. So just be careful. If you're someone selling a home, hope is not a strategy. We don't know how much longer the detached home market might go through this sort of thing. So you're definitely going to want to pay attention. Prices are going to remain challenged for now, but they are showing signs of flatlining too. So keep tuned to the channel, see what goes on. Now, I wanted to wrap up this video by showing you this picture because there was a big announcement recently. It's important to understand what it is. And in fact, we just did a video on our YouTube channel. So if you're not subscribed or you haven't maybe browsed the channel recently, we just did a video all about the big GST announcement that came out of the federal government recently. And in fact, there's a blog post I did on it as well. And what's really interesting is kind of a dynamic that's been created by this announcement. So if you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, GST has been removed on new construction properties for eligible first-time home buyers right across the country. What that has done, though, is that has created a very interesting divide, almost like a class war between new construction properties and newer resale properties. People who need to sell their home that they bought brand new, and they're having to sell them, relatively soon after they initially bought them, maybe a year, 2, 3 years. It's a very, very interesting problem. If you are curious, kind of how that's going to impact and what's going on with that, you're going to want to search out that video on the channel. And I've got more coming out about the GST, explaining the GST. I've got a really good blog on the website as well for anybody considering buying new construction, because the rebate and the way that it's worded and how buried it is ultra confusing. So you can jump onto the blog. It's called GST rebate in there somewhere. And I actually built a calculator to show what rebates are available under $1 million. Of course, the threshold is no GST up to 1 million. And there's a sliding scale between 1 million and 1.5 million, which is ultra confusing and very hard to find what the actual math is on it. So I built a calculator there and it's all there. So definitely go check that out. Now, we got to talk about market drivers before we wrap up the video. Mortgage rates. So we've talked a lot in the past about mortgage rates, and from the time of filming this last month to today, there is a war happening right now, which wasn't the case last time. So we need to keep an eye on that. But the Bank of Canada was pretty forward in saying that they didn't think that they were going to have any change in their rates for the remainder of this year. And in fact, there was just an announcement very recently that that was still going to be maintained, even though the war was occurring. But if you're someone that's out there holding your breath about mortgage rates, you might want to call your mortgage broker and get their opinion on that. economic shifts. There's been a ton going on. We had that Supreme Court ruling from the United States that said that the original set of tariffs were illegal. Now I know there's a new set that's substantially less than what was on there previously, but between that and the war in Iran and whatnot. Well, I was going to say we're getting some good news. We've got some good news on one side, and the war clearly is not good news for anybody on the other side. But just keeping an eye on those economic shifts, and those are a couple things to pay attention to. There's a lot of talk going on in BC with land rights and that sort of stuff as well. So you're going to want to keep your eye glued to the news on that. We are entering into our busiest season of the year, which is typically spring. And that hasn't necessarily been the case over the last couple of years, but it's certainly feeling like that on the street. And in fact, some of the stuff I showed you in today's video do show that the activity is picking up. So we did a really cool video on the channel all about people that choose to wait to do something until the spring and the pros and cons about that for both buyers and sellers. So that's on the channel if you want to check that out. And lastly, local policy changes. I don't think there's going to be a lot coming out in the short future here, just because of what's been going on with the real estate market, some of the big losses people have been taking. So I think the government's going to be a little quiet on that. Anyways, guys, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and be sure to check out some of those videos I mentioned. We'll look forward to seeing you next month because you subscribed, right? See you then.